Picture this for a moment. The sun beating down on a vast, golden river, a ribbon of life winding through an endless desert. This is the Nile, the heart of ancient Egypt. We often think of this civilization in terms of monumental pyramids, golden sarcophagi, and powerful pharaohs. But what truly made all of that possible? What was the daily reality for the millions of people who called this land home? The answer lies not in the grand monuments of the dead, but in the life-giving waters that fed them. For thousands of years, the prosperity of Egypt didn't just rise from the sand. It was pulled, netted, and hooked from the river. Today, we're setting aside the familiar stories of kings and gods to explore a mystery that is both more humble and, in many ways, far more profound. We are going to uncover the lost arts and ingenious methods of ancient Egyptian fishing. This was not a simple pastime or a minor supplement to their diet. Fishing was a cornerstone of survival, an industry that fueled an empire. Imagine the scene. From the smallest reed boats to the grand royal barges, the Nile was a bustling aquatic highway and a sprawling natural larder. The ancient Egyptians developed a relationship with this river that was deep, spiritual, and incredibly practical. They didn't just take from the water, they learned its rhythms, they understood its inhabitants, and they engineered tools with a sophistication that will truly surprise you. We'll be deciphering hieroglyphic clues left on tomb walls, examining artifacts that have survived millennia, and piecing together a forgotten narrative of innovation. How did they craft nets strong enough to haul in massive Nile perch? What kind of hooks did they forge without iron? And what secret, almost magical techniques did they employ that modern anglers would marvel at? This journey is about more than just history. It's a window into the human spirit of adaptation. It's a story of how a civilization looked at a challenging environment and, through pure ingenuity, turned it into a sustainable source of life for generation after generation. By understanding how they fished, we get a clearer, more intimate picture of who they really were, not just as tomb builders, but as fathers, mothers, farmers, and craftsmen whose lives were intimately tied to the pulse of the river. As we cast our line back through time, prepare to see ancient Egypt in a completely new light, to discover the incredible secrets hidden just beneath the surface of the water, and to appreciate the remarkable, everyday brilliance that allowed one of the world's greatest civilizations to not only survive, but to truly thrive. To truly grasp the ingenuity of ancient Egyptian fishing, we first have to understand the stage upon which this entire drama unfolded. Forget for a moment the silent, monolithic pyramids and shift your focus to the one constant, dynamic force in their world, the Nile River. This wasn't just a body of water, it was the very circulatory system of the civilization. Every year, with a reliability that felt divinely ordained, the river would swell from summer rains far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands. This was the annual inundation, an event so critical it defined their entire calendar. The floodwaters would burst the river's banks, spreading a layer of incredibly fertile black silt across the farmland, but they also performed another, equally vital function. They transformed the entire floodplain into a vast, temporary nursery for fish. As the waters receded, countless fish were trapped in newly formed lagoons, ponds, and canals, creating a seasonal bonanza that was incredibly easy to harvest. This natural cycle created two distinct fishing seasons, one in the deeper, open river during the low water period, and another, more concentrated harvest in the receding floodwaters, a time of plenty that helped sustain the population through the year. The river itself teemed with a biodiversity that is almost hard to conceive of today. We're talking about over 60 different species of fish swimming in those ancient currents. The most prized was the mighty Nile perch, a colossal fish that could grow longer than a tall man and weigh as much as a child. But the waters also held enormous Nile tilapia, sharp-toothed catfish, and the peculiar elephant fish, with its trunk-like snout. This abundance wasn't just a happy accident, it was the foundation of their economy and their dinner plates. While the elite enjoyed beef and fowl, for the vast majority of Egyptians, the farmers, the laborers, the artisans, fish was the primary, and often the only, source of daily protein. It was so central to their existence that they developed sophisticated preservation methods, drying and salting their catches in the relentless sun to create a storable, transportable commodity that could feed workers on state projects or be traded throughout the kingdom. More than just a source of food and wealth, the Nile was a spiritual artery. The Egyptians didn't just live beside the river, they lived with it in a relationship of deep reverence. They deified the river in the form of Hapi, the god of the annual flood, who was depicted with heavy, pendulous breasts, symbolizing his role as the nourisher of the land. Fish, too, held a complex place in their cosmology. Some species, like the oxyhynchus fish, were considered sacred in certain regions, while in others, certain types of fish were avoided by priests for ritual reasons. This intertwining of the practical and the sacred meant that their interaction with the river's bounty was never purely mechanical. It was an engagement with a living, divine force. Every time a fisherman set out on the water, he was navigating a physical world rich with life and a spiritual world rich with meaning. This profound connection, this intimate understanding of the river's rhythms and inhabitants, was the essential bedrock upon which all of their fishing technology and technique was built. But with such an incredible abundance of fish in the river, how did this bounty actually make its way onto the dinner plates of ancient Egypt? The role of fish in their diet was far more complex and fascinating than simply being a source of protein. Archaeological evidence gives us a remarkably clear window into this everyday reality. Step inside almost any tomb from the Old Kingdom onward, and you'll find the walls alive with vibrant scenes of daily life, painted there to ensure the deceased had everything they needed in the afterlife. Among these depictions, fishing scenes are incredibly common. We see fishermen hauling in nets straining with fish, others using lines with hooks, and still others spearing large fish from papyrus skiffs. But just as telling are the scenes in the kitchens and at the banquet tables. Here, servants are shown preparing fish gutted, cleaned, and often being grilled over open fires. Food remains from settlement sites, and even from the stomachs of mummified bodies confirm what the art suggests. Fish was a dietary staple on a massive scale. The most commonly consumed fish read like a who's who of the Nile's aquatic inhabitants. The prized catch was undoubtedly the Nile perch, a massive fish that could feed a large family. Its size and flaky white meat made it highly desirable. Then there was the tilapia, a smaller, bony fish, but one that was incredibly prolific and easy to catch in shallow waters. And we cannot forget the catfish, a resilient bottom feeder that was easily identified by its distinctive whisker-like barbels. While it might not have the prestige of the perch, the catfish was a workhorse of the ancient Egyptian diet, available to even the poorest fishermen. The elephant fish, with its strange, flexible snout, was also a common find, its bones frequently uncovered in ancient garbage heaps. Preparation was key, especially in a climate as hot as Egypt's. The most immediate method was, of course, to eat the fish fresh. Tomb paintings show fish being grilled directly over flames, a quick and simple way to cook the day's catch. But for storage and trade, more sophisticated techniques were essential. The Egyptians became masters of preservation. Fish were gutted, split open, and laid out to dry in the blistering sun and dry desert air. This process, similar to making modern-day stockfish, would desiccate the fish, preventing bacterial growth and allowing it to be stored for months. In some cases, they also used salt, either from the Mediterranean or from desert deposits, to cure their catch, creating a product that could be transported vast distances up and down the Nile. These preserved fish were a form of ancient power bar, a compact, durable, and protein-rich food that was perfect for supplying state-sponsored projects. The thousands of laborers who built the pyramids were almost certainly sustained on a diet of bread, beer, and dried salted fish. The consumption of fish, however, was not a simple, classless affair. For the vast majority of the population, the farmers, craftsmen, and laborers, fish was an irreplaceable part of their daily sustenance. It was their bread and butter, or more accurately, their bread and fish. But the social standing of different fish species was surprisingly nuanced. While the elite certainly enjoyed the prime cuts of a large Nile perch, there is evidence that they sometimes looked down upon certain types of fish, particularly the catfish, considering it a food of the common people. This wasn't just a matter of taste, it was often tied to deep and powerful religious beliefs. The Egyptians held a complex and sometimes contradictory set of taboos surrounding fish. In some regions, certain species were considered sacred manifestations of gods. The city of Oxyrhynchus, for example, was named after a sharp-nosed fish that was venerated there, and it would have been unthinkable for a local to eat one. Conversely, in other areas, priests and those who were ritually pure would abstain from eating fish altogether during certain religious observances. Texts suggest that fish were sometimes viewed as creatures of chaos, associated with the god Set, who murdered his brother Osiris. There was a belief that the Oxyrhynchus fish had eaten a part of Osiris's body, making it and other fish like it ritually unclean for those preparing for temple service. This creates a fascinating picture. A society where a fisherman might be hauling in a catch that would be a feast for a working-class family in one town, but a sacrilegious abomination for a priest in another. This duality shows us that for the ancient Egyptians, food was never just about sustenance. It was woven into the very fabric of their social structure and their spiritual universe, a daily reminder of their place in both the community and the cosmos. So, with fish sustaining the population so completely, it naturally evolved into a powerful economic engine that fueled far more than just empty stomachs. Think of the Nile not just as a river, but as a liquid marketplace, a bustling aquatic highway for a massive, decentralized industry. While the individual farmer might catch a few fish for his family, professional fishermen operated on an industrial scale. Entire villages, particularly those in the Delta region where the Nile fans out into the Mediterranean, became specialized fishing hubs. Their catches weren't just for local consumption, they were commodities to be processed, packaged, and traded across the kingdom. This is where the real economic magic happened. The preservation techniques we touched on earlier, drying and salting, were the key that unlocked long-distance trade. By transforming a highly perishable resource into a durable, lightweight, and protein-rich good, the Egyptians created one of the world's earliest forms of canned food. This allowed fish to become a major export, transported in pottery jars and woven baskets on donkeys and boats, moving from these fishing villages deep into the arid desert and to distant cities upriver. The scale of this trade is hinted at in ancient administrative records. In one fascinating account from the Middle Kingdom, an official reports the delivery of thousands of fish to a temple estate, not as food for a festival, but as a regular form of tax payment. This tells us that fish was a recognized and measurable unit of economic value, as good as grain or woven linen. It was a form of tribute that outlying regions could send to the central government, a tangible representation of their productivity. We also have evidence of fishing rights being leased from the state or from large temple estates. A fisherman might pay for the privilege of fishing in a certain part of the river or a productive canal with a portion of his catch, a system that directly fed the immense storage facilities of the royal and religious bureaucracies. These stored surpluses were a form of ancient wealth, a strategic reserve that could be used to pay workers on state projects, supply the army on campaign, or alleviate famine during a poor harvest. The fish pulled from the Nile literally built Egypt, providing the caloric fuel for the laborers who raised its monuments. This sprawling industry, in turn, created a cascade of supporting trades, generating livelihoods for a significant segment of the population who never once set foot in a boat. Consider the boatwrights, the skilled craftsmen who constructed the vast fleet of papyrus, reed, and wooden vessels that plied the river. From the simple, nimble skiffs used by a single fisherman to the larger, more robust wooden boats capable of hauling heavy nets and large crews. This was a specialized and essential profession. Then there were the net makers, who spent their days twisting and knotting linen fibers into every conceivable type of net, from wide drag nets to intricate cast nets. Rope makers, sail makers, and potters who produced the countless weights and floats for the nets all found steady work because of the fishing trade. Even the tool makers were essential, crafting the copper fish hooks, harpoon points, and bone needles used for net repair. This created a vibrant economic ecosystem where the success of the fishermen directly supported a web of artisans and suppliers, weaving the fishing industry into the very fabric of the broader economy. The economic influence of the Nile's bounty even extended beyond Egypt's borders. Archaeological evidence suggests that processed Egyptian fish was a valued trade good in neighboring regions. We find traces of this commerce with Nubia to the south and across the Sinai into the Levant. In a world without refrigeration, a jar of salted Nile perch or dried tilapia was a valuable and non-perishable source of nutrition, a welcome addition to the diets of trading partners. This trade wasn't a one-way street. It brought foreign goods and ideas back into Egypt, further enriching the civilization. So, when we picture the ancient Egyptian economy, we must look beyond the grain fields and the gold mines. We have to see the bustling fishing wharves, the smoky drying sheds, and the boats laden with pottery jars full of fish, all forming a critical, dynamic, and often overlooked pillar of one of history's most enduring empires. Yet for all the scale of this vast fishing economy, the most personal and perhaps most ancient connection to the river began with a single strand and a sharp point. Before the massive nets and the organized trade, there was the simple, patient art of the hook and line. This was fishing at its most fundamental, a method accessible to nearly anyone. We have stunningly clear evidence of this from the tomb walls themselves, where nobles had their earthly lives depicted in meticulous detail. In these vibrant scenes, we often see a lone fisherman sitting in a slender papyrus skiff, a single line held between his fingers, waiting for a telltale tug from the world below the surface. This wasn't just an image of leisure, it was a snapshot of a daily reality, a testament to a technology that was both elegantly simple and remarkably effective. The heart of this setup was the hook itself, a masterpiece of miniature engineering crafted from whatever materials were at hand. In the earliest periods, before widespread metalworking, fishermen used what nature provided. They skillfully shaped sharp, strong bones, often from larger animals or even from the Nile perch itself, into functional hooks. Shells, particularly from the river mussel, could be ground down to a sharp point and lashed to the line. The ingenuity here is breathtaking. It was a technology born directly from the environment. With the dawn of the metallurgical age, however, the hook was transformed. Artisans began to smelt copper, hammering it into slender, barbed hooks that gave the fisherman a much greater chance of securing his catch. Later, with the introduction of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, these hooks became stronger, sharper, and more durable, capable of holding the powerful struggles of a large catfish or a determined perch. The creation of a metal hook was a delicate process, involving heating the metal, painstakingly hammering it into a J or G shape, and then carefully filing a sharp point and, crucially, a barb to prevent the fish from slipping free. This hook needed a connection to the fishermen, and for that, they turned to the plant kingdom. The line was almost certainly made from twisted fibers of flax, the very same plant that gave Egypt its famous linen. By taking the long, strong strands from the flax plant and twisting them together, sometimes against the thigh, a fisherman could create a remarkably tough and durable cordage. This line, while not as thin or strong as modern monofilament, was more than capable of handling the fish of the Nile. As for what tempted the fish to bite, the ancient angler had a full arsenal of natural baits. Tomb scenes sometimes show small containers near fishermen, and while they don't explicitly label the contents, it's logical to assume they held bait. They would have used worms dug from the riverbank, grubs, bits of smaller fish, or even chunks of bread or cheese, whatever was available and proven to attract their target. This method was perfectly suited for catching a wide variety of fish, particularly the medium-sized species that prowled the river's edges and the quieter backwaters. A fisherman with a line could stealthily target a specific basking tilapia, or drop his baited hook near the submerged roots where a catfish might be lurking. It was a quiet, solitary, and highly efficient way to put food on the table. This is what made the hook and line so democratic. It didn't require a large crew, an expensive net, or a substantial boat. A common farmer, after a day in the fields, could take a simple line and a hook he crafted himself down to the riverbank and, with patience and skill, provide a vital supplement to his family's diet. It represented a direct, one-on-one engagement with the Nile, a silent contest of wits between man and fish that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. The remarkable ingenuity of the ancient Egyptian angler becomes even clearer when we trace the slow, deliberate evolution of their most personal tool, the fish hook. This journey from a simple, sharpened piece of bone to a carefully engineered metal hook is a story of technological refinement written in the artifacts they left behind. In the very earliest periods, long before the age of pyramids, fishing was a matter of using what was immediately available. Archaeologists working at prehistoric sites in the Nile Valley have uncovered some of the most primitive hooks imaginable, nothing more than a sharp thorn, likely from an acacia tree, lashed to a line. This was the absolute baseline of hook technology, a simple point that could snag a fish but offered little guarantee of holding it. Soon after, we see a leap in sophistication with hooks meticulously carved from bone. Using the strong, dense leg bones of animals like gazelles or even the sharp spines from the massive Nile perch itself, early craftsmen would grind and abrade the bone into a distinct J or G shape. These bone hooks required immense patience and skill to produce, but they were far more reliable than a thorn, representing a crucial step in humanity's long quest to master the aquatic world. The true revolution, however, began with the mastery of metal. The transition from bone to copper marks one of the most significant technological shifts in fishing history. With the dawn of the Old Kingdom and the rise of organized metallurgy, Egyptian artisans began to smelt copper ore. They would heat the metal until it was malleable and then painstakingly hammer it into thin, sharp points. These early copper hooks were often quite simple, but they possessed a key advantage over bone. They could be worked and reshaped, and they could be fashioned with a barb. The barb, that small, reverse-facing point on the inside of the hook, was a game-changing innovation. It meant that once a fish was hooked, it was far less likely to work itself free through the thrashing struggle. This single design feature dramatically increased a fisherman's success rate, turning a potential loss into a secured meal. As Egyptian metalworking advanced into the Middle and New Kingdoms, so too did the hook. The introduction of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, created a tool that was stronger, harder, and more corrosion-resistant than pure copper. This new material allowed for the creation of smaller, finer hooks for smaller species, as well as incredibly strong, heavy-gauge hooks capable of battling the river's true leviathans. The archaeological record provides stunning proof of this evolution. Excavations at workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, have turned up not just finished hooks, but also the clay molds used to cast them. This tells us that hook making had become a specialized craft, with standardized production methods. We even find broken hooks that were carefully resharpened or rebent, a testament to how valuable these metal tools were to their owners. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this technological story is how the Egyptians applied their growing understanding of marine biology to their designs. They were not making one universal hook. They were crafting specialized tools for specific prey. For smaller, nibbling fish like tilapia, they created delicate, small barbed hooks that could be easily concealed within a bait. For the powerful and notoriously stubborn catfish, which has a hard, bony mouth, they developed a different strategy altogether. Catfish are scavengers and often swallow bait whole, so Egyptian hookmakers crafted what are known as gorge hooks. These weren't J-shaped at all. Instead, they were long, straight slivers of bone or metal, sharpened at both ends and tied in the middle of the line. The fish would swallow the entire gorge, and when it pulled on the line, the stick would turn sideways, lodging firmly in its throat or gut. This brilliant, species-specific adaptation shows an intimate knowledge of fish behavior that goes far beyond simple tool making. For the ultimate prize, the colossal Nile perch, they forged large, heavy, and brutally strong bronze hooks, sometimes with multiple barbs, designed to set deeply and withstand a battle of sheer strength. This wasn't just a progression of materials, it was the dawn of strategic angling, a clear signal that the ancient Egyptians were not just taking fish from the river, they were studying them. But for all the quiet patience of the hook and line, ancient Egyptian fishing truly reached an industrial scale with the use of nets. This was fishing transformed from a solitary pursuit into a coordinated, communal effort, a method capable of harvesting the river's bounty by the hundreds. Imagine a group of fishermen, their muscles straining in unison as they haul a massive, writhing blanket of linen from the water, teeming with silvery fish. This was the reality of net fishing, an ancient technology of astonishing efficiency. The Egyptians didn't just have one type of net, they developed an entire arsenal, each designed for a specific purpose and environment, showcasing a sophisticated understanding of hydrodynamics and fish behavior long before the science had a name. The most personal of these net types was the cast net, a tool that required incredible skill and a dancer's sense of timing. Picture a circular net, anywhere from 6 to 15 feet across, with carefully crafted weights sewn around its outer edge. A single fisherman would gather this net in his hands, coiling it in a precise manner to ensure it would fly open. Standing in the shallows or in the prow of his papyrus skiff, he would spot a school of fish shimmering just below the surface. In one fluid, powerful motion, he would spin and cast the net outward. If done correctly, the weights would pull the net down through the water, forming a perfect, encapsulating dome that trapped everything beneath it. The fisherman would then carefully pull on a central retrieval line, drawing the bottom of the net closed like a purse, and haul in his catch. Tomb scenes at sites like Saqqara and Beni Hassan capture this moment with beautiful clarity, freezing the fisherman in a graceful, almost athletic pose, the net suspended in a perfect circle above the water. It was a method that yielded smaller, but more immediate results, a testament to individual prowess. For much larger hauls, however, the Egyptians turned to the dragnet and the seine net. These were the true powerhouses of the industry, requiring teamwork and significant manpower. A dragnet was essentially a large, weighted net that was pulled along the bottom of the river or through dense papyrus thickets, scooping up everything in its path. This was a brutal but effective method, often used in the shallow lagoons left by the receding inundation. A more sophisticated version was the seine net, a massive wall of netting that could be hundreds of feet long. This net featured floats along its top edge, made from buoyant wood or sealed pottery jars, and stone or ceramic weights along the bottom. One team of fishermen would remain on the shore or in an anchored boat, holding one end of this gigantic net. Another team would take the other end and row in a wide, sweeping arc, deploying the net to encircle an entire school of fish. Once the circle was complete, both teams would begin the back-breaking work of hauling the net in, hand over hand, gradually constricting the area and concentrating the frantic fish into a dense, seething mass before finally dragging them onto the beach or into the boat. The sheer coordination required was immense, a synchronized dance of shouting, pulling, and timing. The material from which these life-sustaining webs were woven was as vital as their design. The Egyptians primarily used linen, spun from the fibers of the flax plant. This was not the fine linen used for royal garments, but a much tougher, coarser grade, twisted and knotted into a remarkably strong and durable cordage. The process of net making was a craft in itself, one that would have been practiced in villages and households across Egypt. Tomb models and paintings sometimes show women involved in textile work, and it is not a stretch to imagine them knotting the endless rows of a net, while men repaired tiers or attached new floats and weights. The nets were not indestructible. They could snag on submerged branches or be torn by particularly large fish, so constant maintenance was part of the fishermen's daily life. They carried net shuttles and needles, often crafted from bone, to make swift repairs on the riverbank, ensuring their most valuable tool was always ready for the next cast. The payoff for all this skill and labor was staggering. Where a hook and line might yield a few fish for a family's meal, a single successful haul of a large seine net could provide enough food to feed an entire village or supply a royal work crew for days. Tomb scenes from the Old Kingdom, such as those in the mastaba of Tai at Saqqara, provide a breathtaking visual record of this scale. They depict long lines of fishermen, their bodies leaning back against the immense resistance of the water, hauling in a net so full of fish that it is spilling over. Beneath the boat, the water is a chaotic scene of aquatic life. Nile perch, mullet, and catfish are shown in such profusion that they are piled on top of one another. In some scenes, supervisors stand by, recording the catch on papyrus scrolls, turning a natural harvest into an administrative event. This was more than just fishing. It was a systematic harvest, a demonstration of human cooperation and technological mastery that allowed them to draw sustenance from the river on a truly monumental scale, proving that the ancient Egyptians were not just participants in their ecosystem, but active and brilliant managers of its resources. Crafting these vast, intricate nets was a sophisticated art form in itself, a quiet science practiced on riverbanks and in village squares that was every bit as vital as the act of fishing. The process began with the most fundamental of materials, the humble flax plant. While we often associate flax with the fine linen used for clothing, the Egyptians were masters of grading and utilizing this versatile plant for every possible purpose. For their nets, they needed strength and durability above all else. They would harvest the long, tough fibers from the flax stems and, through a meticulous process of soaking, beating, and combing, prepare them for spinning. Using a simple handheld spindle, a whorl of stone or pottery attached to a wooden rod, they would twist these coarse fibers together, drawing them out into a continuous, robust thread. This wasn't the fine thread for weaving a tunic. This was a thick, powerful cordage, often made by twisting multiple strands of the initial thread together to create a rope strong enough to withstand the immense force of a thrashing Nile perch and the abrasive pull of the riverbed. Once they had their strong, reliable cordage, the true craft began, the knotting. The Egyptians predominantly used what is known as the sheet bend knot, a simple yet brilliantly effective knot that creates a secure, flexible mesh. This knot has a remarkable quality: the harder the net is pulled, the tighter the knot itself becomes, locking the fibers in place and preventing the entire structure from unraveling. To build these nets to the immense sizes required for seining, they relied on specialized tools that have been found in archaeological contexts. The netting needle, typically a narrow, polished piece of wood, bone, or ivory with notched ends, acted as a shuttle. The cordage would be wound around this needle, allowing the net maker to pass it quickly and efficiently through the loops of the growing mesh. They also used a gauge, often just a flat piece of wood or bone, to standardize the size of each mesh opening. By wrapping the cord around this gauge before tying the knot, they could ensure every single hole in the net was identical, creating a uniform and predictable tool. This consistency was not about aesthetics, it was about function. A net with irregular meshes would have weak points and would perform unpredictably in the water. This leads us to one of the most brilliant aspects of the craft: the deliberate, strategic design of different nets for different prey. The ancient Egyptian net maker was not creating a one-size-fits-all tool. He was an early marine biologist, tailoring his creations to the specific size and behavior of his target. For catching vast schools of small, bait fish like the abundant tilapia, they would create nets with a very fine mesh, sometimes with openings of just a finger's width. This ensured that even the smallest fish would be caught, providing a dense catch perfect for drying and salting in bulk. Conversely, for targeting the giants of the river, the net design changed dramatically. To catch a massive Nile perch, which could easily snap a fine mesh or simply burst through it, they would craft nets with a much larger, more open weave. This served two purposes. It allowed the net to be stronger, using thicker cordage to handle the immense weight and power of the fish, and it also allowed smaller, less desirable fish to simply swim through the holes. effectively self-sorting the catch to focus only on the most valuable specimens. This demonstrates a level of foresight and ecological understanding that is truly impressive, showing they were thinking about sustainability and efficiency millennia before the concepts had names. This specialized knowledge was not something one simply picked up. It was a trade, a skill set passed carefully from one generation to the next. A master net maker held a position of respect within his community, for the quality of his work directly impacted the food security and economic prosperity of the entire village. A poorly made net with weak knots or inconsistent mesh would fail at the worst possible moment, losing a day's catch and putting the fishermen in danger. This craft was so essential that we find evidence of it permeating the spiritual life of the culture. Just as the fisherman might offer a prayer to Happy for a good catch, the net maker understood that he was creating a sacred tool, an instrument of the river's bounty. Every knot tied was a gesture of faith in the cycle of the inundation and a practical commitment to the community's survival. The creation of a net was a slow, meditative process, a weaving together of plant fibers, human ingenuity, and deep cultural tradition into a strong, reliable web that connected the people directly to the life-giving heart of the Nile. While the hook and line required patience and the massive nets demanded immense teamwork, the ancient Egyptians also perfected a third, brilliantly efficient category of fishing technology, one that did the work for them. This was the world of passive fishing, a system of ingenious traps and clever barriers that harnessed the natural movement of the fish themselves, turning the river's current into an accomplice. Imagine setting a device in the water at dusk and returning at dawn to find it full of fish, all caught while you slept. This wasn't magic, it was applied engineering, and it revolved around two remarkable inventions, the portable wicker trap and the permanent fish weir. The most personal and widespread of these devices was the basket trap, a masterpiece of woven craftsmanship. Fashioned from the flexible, abundant reeds and rushes that grew along the Nile's banks, these traps were conical or cylindrical baskets with a cleverly designed internal mechanism, a funnel-shaped entrance. A fisherman would bait the trap with something irresistible, perhaps a mash of bread or a piece of rotting fish, and then lower it into a likely spot in the river, often tying it to a stake on the bank or a heavy stone on the bottom. A fish, drawn by the scent, would swim easily through the wide outer opening of the funnel, nudging its way into the main chamber of the trap to get at the bait. The escape, however, was deliberately designed to be nearly impossible. The narrow, inner opening of the funnel was too small and confusing for the fish to find and navigate in its panicked state. It was a classic one-way system, a submerged prison that required no supervision, capable of catching fish around the clock. We have stunningly clear evidence of these devices from tomb models, like one found in a Middle Kingdom tomb at Beni Hassan, which shows a detailed miniature wicker trap, proving that these were essential enough items to be included in the afterlife. For harvesting fish on a truly massive, almost industrial scale, the Egyptians engineered something far more permanent and imposing, the fish weir. This was not a portable tool but a fixed installation, a strategic alteration of the aquatic landscape. A weir was essentially a barrier built across a narrow channel, a side canal, or at the edge of a receding floodplain lagoon. Constructed from materials close at hand, it could be a dense fence of tightly packed reeds driven into the riverbed or a low wall of stones and mud. The genius of the weir wasn't just in the barrier itself, but in its shape. It was rarely a straight line. Instead, it was often built in a V or a wide arc, with the open end facing the current. This design acted as a giant funnel, guiding fish that were moving with the water flow directly into a waiting trap or enclosed pound at the narrow end. As the water level dropped, especially after the inundation, fish following the receding water would be channeled by these walls into ever smaller areas, where they could be collected by the basketful with minimal effort. The beauty of these passive systems lay in their relentless efficiency and their ability to multiply a fisherman's efforts. A single fisherman could maintain dozens of basket traps scattered across a productive stretch of river, checking them each morning and evening. This meant that even while he was tending his fields, mending his nets, or building his home, His traps were still working, providing a steady, reliable trickle of food for his family. The weirs, often community-owned and maintained, provided a similar constant yield. They transformed the seasonal bounty of the inundation into a managed resource, a predictable harvest that could be planned for. This represents a profound shift in the human relationship with the environment. It's no longer about a direct, active hunt with spear or hook. It's about setting a stage, creating a situation where the environment's own rules work in your favor. It's the difference between chasing your food and having your food deliver itself to you, a testament to an intelligence that sought not just to exploit the Nile, but to collaborate with its rhythms in the most resourceful way imaginable. Now, if you thought the stationary basket trap was clever, wait until you see its more sophisticated, aquatic cousin, the fyke net. This device took the basic funnel principle of the basket trap and transformed it into something far more dynamic and powerful, a true net for flowing water. Imagine a series of large, rigid hoops, often made of flexible willow or tamarisk branches, arranged in a long, tapered tunnel shape, with the entire structure covered in a strong linen netting. The first hoop was the widest, acting as a gaping mouth, and each subsequent hoop grew progressively smaller, leading the fish deeper into the trap. Inside, a series of internal funnel openings, much like those in the basket traps, prevented the fish from finding their way back out. But the real genius of the fyke net was in its deployment. It wasn't just dropped anywhere. It was designed to be anchored on the riverbed in places where the current was naturally funneling fish in narrow irrigation channels, the mouths of small tributaries, or through gaps in the papyrus reeds. The flow of the water itself did most of the work, guiding unsuspecting fish directly into the gaping entrance of the net as they moved with the current. This made the fyke net supremely effective in one of the most productive fishing grounds in all of Egypt, the vast marshy delta region. Here, the Nile splits into a labyrinth of distributaries, creating a sprawling network of slow-moving waterways, canals, and dense thickets of papyrus. In this aquatic maze, fish were constantly on the move, navigating these narrow passages. By strategically placing a fyke net in one of these channels, a fisherman could essentially set up a toll booth on a fish highway. The current ensured a constant stream of potential captives drifting into the trap, and the design meant that the catch could be substantial without requiring the back-breaking labor of a seine net haul. The fisherman could leave the net in place for hours or even days, periodically checking it to collect a fresh, live catch. This method was particularly devastating during the period when the annual floodwaters were receding, as fish that had spawned in the flooded marshes were now being forced back into the main river channels, swimming directly into these waiting, funnel-shaped gates. While direct archaeological finds of the organic materials, the nets, and the wooden hoops are incredibly rare due to decay, we have compelling indirect evidence for their use. The most telling clues come, once again, from tomb art. In the tomb of the nobleman Ukhotep from the Middle Kingdom period, there is a detailed scene that many Egyptologists interpret as the use of a fyke net. It shows a long, cylindrical object with clear hoop-like structures submerged in the water, with fish clearly depicted inside it. This visual record is crucial because it shows a device that is distinctly different from a simple basket trap. It has a length and a structure that implies it was meant to be laid horizontally in the watercourse, not vertically like a basket. Furthermore, the discovery of large numbers of stone and ceramic net sinkers in patterns that suggest they were used to weigh down a long, linear net, rather than a circular cast net, also supports the idea of these more complex, stationary trap nets. The fyke net represents a significant leap in technological thinking. It's not just a trap, it's an automated fishing system that leverages hydrology and fish migratory behavior. The simple basket trap was opportunistic, relying on a fish's individual curiosity for bait. The fyke net, by contrast, was strategic. It exploited the collective movement of entire populations of fish, harnessing the river's own energy to power a continuous harvest. This shift from passive baiting to active channeling marks a move toward a more sophisticated, almost industrial form of fishing. It shows that Egyptian fishermen were not just observing the river, They were analyzing its flow patterns and the behaviors of its inhabitants, then designing precision tools to intercept them. This innovation speaks to a deepening mastery of their environment, a move from simply gathering what the Nile offered to engineering systems that optimize the yield, making every current and every channel work in their favor. Yet for all the brilliant engineering of nets and traps, there remained a form of fishing that was pure, unadulterated adrenaline, a direct, primal contest between a human and a fish, decided in a single, decisive thrust. This was the world of spearfishing, a method captured in breathtaking detail on the tomb walls of nobles, forever freezing moments of incredible action and precision. In these vibrant scenes, we don't see the communal haul of a net or the patient weight of a line. We see a lone figure, balanced perfectly in the prow of a slender papyrus skiff, a long spear poised high above his head, his body a coiled spring of focused energy. The target is often a massive Nile perch or a powerful catfish, its size dramatically emphasized to showcase the hunter's bravery and skill. This was fishing at its most visceral and personal, a testament to human coordination and nerve. The tools of this trade were as specialized as the technique itself. The ancient Egyptians employed two primary types of spearing instruments, each designed for a specific purpose. The first was the single-pointed spear, a formidable weapon with a long, sturdy wooden shaft tipped with a sharp, barbed point of copper or bronze. This was the tool for going after the true giants of the river, the huge Nile perch that could shatter a lesser weapon with a single thrash of its tail. The barb was crucial here. It ensured that once the point penetrated the fish's tough scales, it would not easily pull free during the violent struggle that followed. The second, and perhaps more fascinating tool, was the leister or multi-pronged spear. This device typically had a central, barbed point flanked by two or more outward curving prongs. The beauty of the leister was that it didn't require a perfectly precise, kill-shot strike. The outer prongs acted as a cage, trapping the fish against the central point even if the thrust wasn't perfectly centered. This made it an ideal weapon for faster-moving or smaller fish in shallow, weedy waters where a perfect aim was difficult. This naturally leads to a compelling question. Was this daring method the sport of kings or the supper of commoners? The evidence from tomb art is somewhat deceptive, because these dramatic scenes are almost exclusively found in the lavish tombs of the elite. They were long interpreted as depictions of a noble pastime, a leisure activity for the upper class who sought excitement on the water. There is likely truth to this. The thrill of the hunt and the display of martial skill would have held great appeal for a nobleman. However, to view spearfishing solely as a sport is to miss its profound practicality. For common fishermen working the vast, shallow lagoons left by the inundation, a multi-pronged leister was an incredibly efficient tool. In these confined, reedy waters, where casting a net was impossible and a hook and line was too slow, a fisherman could wade silently, spear in hand, targeting fish with a swift, accurate thrust. A single skilled spearman could secure a meal in seconds, making it a vital subsistence technique in specific environments. The skill required for this cannot be overstated. This was not a game of brute force. It was a discipline of physics, patience, and perception. A spearfisherman had to account for the distorting effect of water on light, the phenomenon of refraction that makes a fish appear in a different location than where it actually is. The ancient Egyptians, through relentless practice and observation, learned to instinctively correct for this, aiming not at the fish they saw, but at the fish's true position. This required an almost supernatural level of hand-eye coordination. Furthermore, the strike itself had to be a fluid, full-body motion. It wasn't just an arm thrust. It was a coordinated movement starting from the feet, traveling through the torso, and culminating in a powerful, accelerating lunge of the arm to drive the spear tip through the water with enough force and speed to impale the target before it could react and dart away. They even developed methods to stack the odds in their favor, turning the natural behaviors of fish into a strategic advantage. Tomb scenes and textual hints suggest that spearfishing was often practiced at night, a tactic that reveals a deep understanding of animal psychology. A fisherman would venture out onto the dark, placid river in his silent papyrus boat, carrying a crackling torch or a clay lamp filled with oil. He would hold the flame over the water, its light piercing the inky blackness and creating a glowing pool on the surface. This light acted as a powerful attractant. Curious insects would gather, which in turn drew smaller fish to the surface to feed on them. These smaller fish then attracted the larger predators, the perch and the catfish, that were the spearman's true prize. In the stillness of the night, with the world reduced to the circle of torchlight, the hunter could wait, motionless, for a silhouette to drift into range. The element of surprise was complete. The fish, drawn by the light and the feeding frenzy, would be oblivious to the danger lurking just above until the spear shot down from the darkness. This combination of sophisticated tool use, profound environmental knowledge, and sheer, daring skill makes spearfishing one of the most captivating and personally resonant of all the ancient Egyptian fishing techniques. A brilliant fusion of human intelligence and raw athletic prowess. Moving from the intimate proximity of the spear to the striking distance of the bow and arrow reveals yet another layer of ancient Egyptian ingenuity, shifting the dynamic from a contest of strength to one of pure, calculated accuracy. While scenes of spearfishing are common in tomb art, depictions of fishing with a bow are far rarer and more specialized, presenting a fascinating puzzle. In these unique illustrations, we see an archer, often of noble status, standing firm in a boat or on the riverbank, his bow fully drawn and aimed not at a distant gazelle, but at a target just beneath the water's surface. This was not a widespread subsistence technique for the common fisherman. It was arguably one of the most difficult and specialized skills ever applied to harvesting the Nile. The central challenge, one that every modern spear fisher understands, is the deceptive nature of water itself. Light bends as it passes from air into water, a phenomenon known as refraction. This means a fish is never exactly where it appears to be to an observer looking down from above. A spearfisher learns to compensate for this instinctively through years of practice, adjusting his aim based on the angle and depth. For an archer, however, the problem is magnified. An arrow travels through the air at high speed, and then, upon hitting the water, is violently slowed and its trajectory is altered yet again. To successfully hit a fish, the archer had to perform a complex mental calculation in an instant, judging not only the fish's true position, but also predicting how his arrow would behave the moment it pierced the water's surface. This required an almost superhuman level of hand-eye coordination and an intuitive grasp of physics that separates this method as the domain of a true master. The arrows themselves were likely specialized for this aquatic purpose. The standard arrow used for hunting land game was fletched with feathers to stabilize its flight through the air, creating spin for accuracy over longer distances. For shooting into water, however, fletching would have been a liability. The moment the feathered end of the arrow hit the water, it would create immense drag, causing the arrow to tumble wildly and veer off course. It is far more probable that fishing arrows were simple, unfletched shafts. Without the stabilizing feathers, their flight through the air would have been less accurate and their range shorter. But upon entering the water, they would have traveled in a much straighter line, like a small harpoon, increasing the chance of actually striking the intended target. The points, too, were probably different. Instead of a narrow, penetrating bodkin point designed for armor, a fishing arrow would have likely had a heavier, barbed head, similar to a small spear point, to ensure it would not only hit the fish but hold fast. This leads to the compelling question of why anyone would go to such extraordinary trouble when nets, traps, and spears were so effective. The evidence suggests two overlapping motivations: prestige and precision. For the nobility, whose lives are so often depicted in tomb art, bow fishing was likely a spectacular demonstration of elite skill and martial prowess. Hitting a moving fish in the water with an arrow is an incredible feat, a display of marksmanship that would have commanded immense respect. It was the ancient equivalent of an extreme sport, a way for a wealthy noble to showcase his training, his steady nerve, and his dominance over the natural world. It was leisure, but leisure with a deadly serious, highly competitive edge. On a more practical level, the bow and arrow could also have been a tool for targeting specific, high-value fish that were difficult to approach closely. A massive Nile perch cruising in a clear, shallow lagoon might spook at the shadow of a boat or the movement of a spearman, but a carefully aimed arrow shot from a greater distance could take it by surprise. In this sense, it was a tool for selective harvesting, allowing an expert to remove a single, prized specimen from a school without disturbing the rest. Given the immense skill barrier and the specialized equipment required, it is almost certain that bow fishing was a very uncommon practice compared to the daily grind of net fishing or the simple reliability of the hook and line. It was not a method that could feed a village or supply a state workforce. Its rarity in the archaeological and artistic record confirms this. It was an exceptional technique for exceptional individuals. Yet, its very existence speaks volumes about the depth of the Egyptian relationship with the river. It shows a culture that was not only focused on efficient harvest, but was also willing to explore the absolute limits of human skill in interaction with their environment. The bow fisherman was not just feeding his family. He was engaging in a profound dialogue with the physics of water and light, pushing the art of fishing into the realm of the extraordinary. To truly become one with the river, the ancient Egyptian fisherman needed more than just clever traps and strong nets. He needed a vessel, a platform from which to work his craft. And for this, he turned to one of the most abundant materials lining the Nile's banks, the papyrus reed. This wasn't just a plant for making paper. It was the fiberglass of its day, the essential building block for the iconic boats that became synonymous with life on the water. These weren't the grand, ocean-going ships of trade or the majestic royal barges. These were the workhorses, the pickup trucks of the common fisherman, lightweight and perfectly adapted to the unique challenges of the Nile environment. The construction of a papyrus skiff was an art form in itself, a testament to practical ingenuity. It began with harvesting the tall, triangular-stemmed papyrus reeds, which could grow over 15 feet high. The builders would gather these reeds into thick, tight bundles, lashing them together with cords made from the very same papyrus or from tougher haffa grass. A typical skiff wasn't built with a keel or a frame like a wooden boat. Instead, its structure came entirely from the way the bundles were arranged and secured. They would create a long, central bundle for the hull, and then often attach two smaller bundles along the sides to give the boat its shape and added buoyancy. The most distinctive feature was the prow, which was always curved dramatically upward, sometimes even touching the stern in a graceful circle. This wasn't merely for aesthetics. This high, curved bow helped the boat slice through dense beds of reeds and ride over small waves without taking on water, making it incredibly nimble in the marshy, shallow areas that were so rich with fish. This design resulted in a vessel with two critical qualities: incredible buoyancy and silent maneuverability. The porous, air-filled stalks of the papyrus reed made the entire boat naturally float very high in the water. This meant a fisherman could pole his skiff through water that was only a few inches deep, accessing the most secluded lagoons and weedy back channels that were completely inaccessible to heavier, deeper drafted wooden boats. This shallow draft was a game changer, opening up entire ecosystems for harvesting. Furthermore, the soft, flexible nature of the papyrus made for an almost silent ride. There was no creaking of wood or the slap of waves against a hard hull. A fisherman could glide silently through a feeding ground, approaching his prey without a sound, which was absolutely essential for the close quarters work of spearfishing or for setting nets without startling entire schools of fish. We have a wonderfully clear window into the use of these boats thanks to the tomb paintings and detailed models left for the afterlife. In the tomb of the official Tai at Saqqara, a vivid scene shows fishermen in a papyrus skiff hauling a massive drag net. The boat is depicted with its characteristic upturned ends, and the fishermen are standing confidently, their movements coordinated, proving the stability of their craft even under the strenuous load of a full net. Even more telling are the wooden models, like those found in the tomb of Meketer from the Middle Kingdom. These were not toys, they were magical substitutes intended to provide for the deceased in the next world. Meketer's model of a papyrus fishing skiff is a masterpiece of detail. It shows a boatman poling the vessel through a marsh teeming with fish, while another man stands ready with a spear. The model captures the texture of the bundled reeds and the relaxed posture of the fishermen, illustrating just how integral these skiffs were to the daily rhythm of life on the river. From the deck of his trusted papyrus skiff, a fisherman could engage in every aspect of his trade. He could paddle or pole out to deeper channels to set his basket traps or deploy his long fyke nets, using the boat as a stable platform for handling the heavy, waterlogged gear. When it was time for a net haul, the skiff became the central command post. For a sane net operation, one boat might anchor while another paid out the net in a wide circle, the skiff's light weight allowing them to maneuver quickly and precisely. And for the spearfisherman, the papyrus boat was an essential hunting blind. He could stand in its prow, feeling the gentle rocking of the flexible reeds beneath his feet, his body perfectly balanced as he tracked the shadow of a Nile perch. The silent approach allowed him to get within striking distance, and the stability of the bundled reeds gave him a solid base for the powerful, lunging thrust of his spear. In a very real sense, the papyrus skiff was more than just a boat. It was an extension of the fisherman's own body and skill, a floating tool that connected him to the water in the most intimate way possible, enabling him to harness the full bounty of the life-giving Nile. While the papyrus skiff was the undisputed champion of the marshes and shallows, when it came to tackling the mighty, open waters of the Nile proper or venturing beyond the river's mouth into the sea, the ancient Egyptians required a different kind of vessel altogether, one of immense strength, capacity, and ocean-going capability. This was the domain of the wooden boat, a technological leap that transformed fishing from a local endeavor into a regional industry and a bold act of maritime exploration. Constructing these larger boats was a monumental undertaking, a clear statement of state power and international connection. Unlike the readily available papyrus reeds, Egypt itself was poor in large, sturdy timber. The native acacia and sycamore fig trees were suitable for small components, but for a hull capable of withstanding the powerful currents of the Nile and the waves of the Mediterranean, they needed something far more robust. This necessity drove them to become master traders and loggers, establishing vast supply chains that reached across the ancient world. The most prized timber was the legendary cedar of Lebanon. These massive trees, growing in the mountains of modern-day Lebanon, provided long, straight, and incredibly durable planks that were resistant to rot and insects. Egyptian texts and reliefs proudly document great trading expeditions sent by the pharaohs to the port of Byblos, where they would exchange gold, papyrus, and linen for these precious logs. The logs would then be lashed together into massive rafts and floated by sea down the coast to the Nile Delta, a journey of hundreds of miles before being transported to royal shipyards. The construction technique itself was a world apart from the bundled reeds of the skiff. These wooden boats were built using a method known as shell-first construction. Instead of starting with an internal frame, as is done today, skilled shipwrights would first lay the keel, then carefully fit and join the planks together edge to edge, fastening them with thousands of meticulously carved wooden tenons pegged into place with sturdy dowels. The entire hull was then reinforced with massive internal framing members, creating a vessel that was both flexible and immensely strong. This method produced boats that were true seacraft, some measuring over 60 feet long, with high sides, a deep draft, and a single massive square sail centered on a towering mast. This sail was the engine for long-distance travel, allowing them to harness the wind to move upriver against the current or to cruise efficiently along the coast. For maneuvering in calm conditions or precise fishing operations, these boats were equipped with multiple large steering oars at the stern and were powered by teams of rowers, turning them into formidable, mobile platforms. The advent of these deep-draft wooden ships opened up entirely new frontiers for Egyptian fishermen. On the open Nile, they could now venture into the deepest, fastest-flowing channels where the most massive Nile perch were known to hunt, areas that were far too dangerous for a fragile papyrus skiff. A single wooden boat could serve as a mothership for an entire fishing fleet, carrying multiple smaller skiffs on deck to be deployed in suitable areas. and then acting as a floating processing station. Its large, open hold could store catches on a scale previously unimaginable, preserving the fish in wet wells or packed in salt, effectively creating a floating warehouse that could transport the bounty of a distant fishing ground directly to the granaries and harbors of major cities like Memphis or Thebes. This capability to move large quantities of perishable goods efficiently was a game changer for the Egyptian economy, integrating distant regions into a single, river-based marketplace and ensuring a steady supply of protein to urban centers and massive labor forces. This maritime prowess inevitably led them beyond the familiar waters of the Nile and out into the vast, unknown expanse of the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. While evidence for dedicated, deep-sea fishing expeditions is more circumstantial, it is strongly supported by a combination of archaeological and artistic clues. In the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Sahure from the 5th dynasty, a stunning relief depicts a fleet of large, sea-going vessels returning from what is labeled as a voyage to the Levant. Among the cargo shown are not only trade goods, but also vivid scenes of men in these boats hauling in nets absolutely brimming with a variety of fish, some of which are clearly identifiable as deep-water species not native to the Nile. This suggests that these state-sponsored trading missions also doubled as exploratory fishing ventures, sampling the rich fisheries of the eastern Mediterranean. The potential catches in these foreign waters would have been extraordinary, including massive tuna, schools of gray mullet, and various species of sea bream, all representing new flavors and economic opportunities for the Egyptian elite. The most tantalizing and controversial possibility, however, involves the hunt for true leviathans. A small number of artifacts and inscriptions have led some scholars to speculate that the Egyptians, at least on occasion, may have engaged in the most dangerous and epic of all maritime pursuits, whaling. A ceremonial palette from the pre-dynastic period, known as the bull palette, depicts among its chaotic animal scenes a figure in a boat confronting a huge, whale-like creature with a distinct blowhole. Furthermore, bones from what appear to be juvenile whales have been found at a few coastal archaeological sites. While this does not constitute definitive proof of active whaling, it strongly suggests that these ancient mariners were at least aware of these giants and may have opportunistically hunted them when they became stranded in shallow waters or when a vulnerable calf was separated from its pod. The sheer caloric and material yield from a single such animal its blubber for oil, its meat for food, its bones for tools would have made it a legendary prize, a story to be told for generations. Whether chasing tuna in the Mediterranean or cautiously approaching a stranded whale, these wooden ships were the keys that unlocked the final, outermost layer of the ancient Egyptian world, transforming a river-based society into a connected, maritime power whose nets and harpoons could reach the very horizon. But for all the ingenuity of their boats and tools, perhaps the most profound adaptation was not in what they used, but when they chose to use it. The ancient Egyptians discovered that by embracing the cloak of night, they could turn the river's darkness into a powerful ally. While the sun blazed overhead, fish often stayed deep or hid in the shadows of the reeds, but as twilight fell and the world cooled, a different kind of life emerged on the Nile. The cover of darkness offered the fishermen a distinct tactical advantage, transforming the familiar river into a stage for a silent, elemental hunt. The key to this nocturnal strategy was a simple yet brilliant application of animal psychology, the irresistible allure of light on the water. Fishermen would venture out in their papyrus skiffs after sunset, carrying clay lamps fueled by oil or handheld torches made from bundles of reeds soaked in resin. They would position this flickering flame just above the surface of the inky black water, creating a glowing, shimmering pool of light. This artificial beacon acted like a magnet in the vast darkness. Insects, drawn from the surrounding marshes, would swarm into the circle of light, dancing just above the surface. Their frantic activity, in turn, attracted smaller, opportunistic fish, tiny tilapia and minnows that rose to feed on the easy bounty. This gathering of smaller fish created a feeding frenzy that then drew in the larger predators, the sleek Nile perch and the stealthy catfish, that were the true prizes of the night. The atmosphere on these nocturnal expeditions must have been charged with a unique tension. Picture the scene, the absolute quiet of the desert night, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the boat and the faint crackle of the torch. The world would have been reduced to that single, intimate circle of orange light, with everything beyond fading into an impenetrable void. The fisherman, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, would stand motionless, peering into the illuminated water, his shadow casting long, dancing shapes across the surface. Beneath him, the drama unfolded. The small fish darted like silver arrows through the glow, and then, from the surrounding gloom, a darker, larger shadow would slowly materialize, circling warily at the edge of the light before moving in for the kill. This was a moment of supreme focus, where a single twitch or a misplaced breath could send the entire school vanishing back into the abyss. With the prey now concentrated and mesmerized by the light, the actual capture became a matter of precision and skill. For the spearfisherman, this was his ultimate moment. The torchlight not only attracted the fish, but also illuminated them perfectly against the dark water, making them crystal-clear targets. The age-old challenge of water refraction was still present, but the perfect visibility and the often calmer night waters made for ideal conditions. With his multi-pronged leister or his single-barbed spear held ready, he would wait for the perfect shot. The strike had to be swift and decisive, a single, fluid lunge down into the water, aiming for the silhouette of a large perch. The sudden eruption of violence in the otherwise still pool was the climax of the hunt, a splash and a struggle before the prize was hauled, glistening, into the boat. This method was not exclusive to spearmen, however. Net fishermen also harnessed the power of light to vastly increase their yields. A team could deploy a small seine net around the perimeter of the illuminated area, effectively corralling the entire congregation of fish that had gathered. The light held them in place, confused and focused on feeding, making them oblivious to the net slowly closing around them until it was too late. This turned a scattershot effort into a guaranteed harvest, demonstrating how a simple understanding of animal behavior could be leveraged for maximum efficiency. The practice of fishing by moonlight and torchlight shows a civilization thinking several moves ahead, not just reacting to their environment, but actively manipulating it using its most fundamental elements, fire, water, and the innate instincts of the creatures within it. It was a perfect fusion of observation, timing, and technology, proving that for the ancient Egyptians, no hour of the day or night was wasted in their endless, ingenious dialogue with the river. This intricate dance of nets and boats, this massive, coordinated effort to harvest the river, could not have functioned without a sophisticated social structure supporting it. The ancient Egyptians were master organizers, and the bustling fishing industry was no exception. While a lone fisherman with a hook and line could support his family, the large-scale operations we see depicted on tomb walls, the massive seine nets requiring a dozen strong arms to haul, the fleets of boats working in unison point to a world of organized labor, of guilds and teams that turned individual effort into a powerful, state-run enterprise. Think of it not as a collection of random individuals, but as a well-oiled machine, where every person had a role, and every catch was meticulously recorded for the kingdom's ledger. These fishermen were often grouped into formal teams, especially when working on large institutional projects. The state and the powerful temple estates, which owned vast tracts of land and waterways, operated their own professional fishing crews. These weren't just casual gatherings, they were structured units, almost like a specialized corps within the broader labor force. We have remarkable evidence of this from administrative documents, like the meticulously kept records from the Middle Kingdom pyramid town of Kahan. These papyri list the deliveries of fish, specifying the types and quantities caught by named fishing crews, who were clearly responsible for meeting specific quotas. The fish they caught wasn't for their own profit in a free market. It was a form of tax in kind, a direct contribution to the state's enormous storage facilities. This system ensured a steady, predictable supply of protein to feed the thousands of laborers building monuments, the soldiers guarding the frontiers, and the priests serving in the temples. The fisherman in this context was a civil servant, his labor directed and his output measured by a central bureaucracy. This naturally leads us to question the social standing of these men. Were they respected professionals or looked down upon as lower-class laborers? The answer, as with so much in ancient Egypt, is complex and layered. On one hand, the sheer importance of their trade for national survival must have conferred a certain level of practical respect. A skilled net maker or a boat captain with an uncanny knowledge of the river's currents would have been a valuable asset to his community. However, the textual evidence suggests they occupied a modest rung on the social ladder. In the famous Satire of the Trades, a text used to train scribes, various professions are lampooned to glorify the clean, easy life of a scribe. The fisherman is described in rather grim terms, highlighting the perpetual dampness, the stench of fish, and the constant struggle with crocodiles and hippos. This literary trope, while exaggerated, indicates that the work was seen as difficult, dirty, and dangerous, placing it well below the prestige of a scribe or a priest. Yet, there are nuances within this hierarchy. The captain of a fishing boat or the overseer of a large estate's fishing operation held a position of clear authority. Tomb scenes sometimes show a figure distinct from the laborers, often depicted as larger or dressed differently, supervising the haul and sometimes holding a scribble palette to record the catch. This overseer was a manager, a link between the working fishermen and the administrative class. His role was crucial, and it likely came with a better standard of living and more respect than the men straining in the water. Furthermore, fishermen who operated independently, selling their catch in local markets rather than working for a state quota, could have achieved a degree of economic autonomy. While they might not have had the social prestige of the land-owning elite, a successful independent fisherman with a good boat and a reliable crew could have been a prosperous and important figure in his own village. The coordination required for their work was extraordinary. A successful seine net operation, for instance, was a masterpiece of synchronized effort. It required a precise division of labor, one team to hold the net steady on the shore, another to row the boat in a perfect arc, a caller to coordinate the haul, and boys ready to collect the flopping fish into baskets as they were brought to land. This wasn't a skill one learned in a day. It was a craft passed from father to son, a deep-seated knowledge of knots, currents, and fish behavior that was honed over a lifetime. They developed their own terminology, their own rhythms, and their own unspoken communication. This created a strong sense of professional identity and camaraderie. These men spent their lives in close quarters, facing the same dangers and celebrating the same successes, bound together by the shared rhythm of the river and the collective effort of drawing life from its depths. Their organization was the invisible net that held the entire industry together, proving that the true strength of ancient Egypt lay not just in its pharaohs and pyramids, but in the coordinated hands of its countless, unsung workers. But to truly understand the ancient Egyptian soul, we must look beyond the economy and the technology, and dive into the deep, spiritual waters of their beliefs. For the relationship between the people and the fish of the Nile was not merely practical. It was profoundly sacred, wrapped in a complex web of mythology, taboo, and divine symbolism. Imagine living in a world where the creature on your dinner plate could also be a manifestation of a god, where catching the wrong fish in the wrong place could be an act of blasphemy. This duality is one of the most fascinating mysteries of their civilization, revealing a worldview where the spiritual and the mundane flowed together as seamlessly as the Nile's own currents. This spiritual complexity is perfectly captured by the story of one particular fish, the oxyhinchus. In the city that bore its name, Permejed, this sharp-nosed fish, likely a type of elephant fish or a species of mormarid, was not just another inhabitant of the river. It was a venerated deity. The people of Oxyrhynchus believed that this fish had eaten the severed phallus of the god Osiris after his brother Set murdered him and dismembered his body. In the grand cyclical drama of Osiris's death and resurrection, which mirrored the annual death and rebirth of the land with the Nile's flood, the Oxyrhynchus fish played a pivotal, if gruesome, role. By consuming this sacred part of the god, the fish itself became sanctified, a living relic of the divine. To harm, or worse, to eat an ingenious fish within that city's territory would have been a terrible sacrilege, a direct insult to Osiris and the promise of eternal life he represented. This was not an abstract belief. It shaped daily life, diet, and local identity in a very real way. Yet, just a short journey down the river, in the city of Letopolis, an entirely different reality prevailed. There, the people worshipped the Nile perch, or Lates Niloticus, which they associated with the goddess Neith, a powerful creator deity and a fierce hunter. The perch was so revered that we have archaeological evidence of them being mummified in vast numbers, carefully wrapped in linen bandages and placed in specially made pottery coffins, just as a human or a cat would be. To the people of Letopolis, the perch was a sacred being, a direct link to the divine. This creates a startling picture of ancient Egypt, a land where a fisherman traveling from one city to another would have to navigate not just the physical geography of the river, but a shifting landscape of religious law. The very same fish that was a divine emblem in one town could be the main course for a commoner's supper in the next. These regional taboos were amplified to a national level when it came to the priesthood and those preparing for important religious festivals. For a priest to enter a state of ritual purity, a necessary condition for approaching the statue of a god in his temple, he was required to abstain from eating fish entirely. Several ancient texts, including the writings of the Greek historian Plutarch, who recorded Egyptian traditions, state that fish were considered ritually unclean for priests. The reasons were deeply symbolic. Some fish, particularly the catfish and the oxyhinchus, were associated with Set, the god of chaos, violence, and the desert. Set was the murderer of Osiris, the embodiment of the forces that threaten the divine order of the universe, known as Mat. To consume a creature linked to this chaotic force was to introduce that chaos into one's own body, rendering a person spiritually polluted and unfit for divine service. This taboo wasn't about hygiene, it was a cosmic safeguard. This spiritual significance extended far beyond dietary laws and into the very heart of Egyptian mythology, where fish were often cast as both helpers and hindrances in the epic stories of the gods. In one powerful myth surrounding the fiery eye of the sun god Ra, the goddess Hathor, in her savage form as the Eye of Ra, goes on a rampage against humanity. To stop her from destroying all of creation, the god of wisdom, Thoth, devises a clever plan. He creates a vast lake of beer, dyed red to resemble blood, which the goddess drinks, becoming so intoxicated she falls asleep and forgets her murderous mission. In some versions of this tale, it is fish who are credited with guiding the sleeping goddess back to Ra, thus becoming saviors of mankind. In other stories, the Abju fish, often identified as the tilapia, is celebrated as the fish that swam alongside the solar bark of the sun god Ra as it journeyed through the perilous waters of the underworld each night. The tilapia was believed to swallow the god's semen, protecting him from hostile forces, and was thus seen as a guardian and a symbol of rebirth, its habit of carrying its eggs in its mouth making it a powerful natural symbol of parental protection and regeneration. This deep spiritual connection manifested in the most tangible way possible, through the practice of mummification. Just as they mummified cats, ibises, and crocodiles as votive offerings to their associated deities, the Egyptians also mummified fish on an industrial scale. At sites like Tebtunis in the Fayum Oasis, archaeologists have uncovered vast catacombs containing millions of mummified Nile perch and other fish, each one a physical prayer offered to the gods. A pilgrim would purchase a mummified fish from the temple priests and present it as an offering, hoping to gain the favor of the goddess Neith or another associated deity. The sheer volume of these mummified fish is staggering, speaking to the profound and widespread devotion of the common people. It also presents a fascinating contradiction. The same species that was raised in temple ponds, mummified with reverence, and offered to the gods was also caught, dried, salted, and eaten by the millions. The Egyptians held both realities in their minds simultaneously without any sense of conflict. A Nile perch could be a divine symbol and a delicious meal, its significance entirely dependent on context. So how did this complex web of belief impact the simple, daily act of fishing? It created an invisible map of do's and don'ts across the river. A fisherman had to possess not just knowledge of the currents and the fish, but also a deep understanding of local religious customs. Was he fishing in a region where the catch was destined for a temple festival? Then he might be forbidden from taking certain species. Was he supplying a community of priests? Then his entire catch might be restricted. This religious framework acted as an early form of conservation, creating de facto sanctuaries in sacred lakes and canals connected to temples, where fish were protected by divine decree. The randomness of nature was thus infused with spiritual meaning. To catch a certain type of fish could be a sign of divine favor. To catch another could be a terrible omen. This intricate dance between the need for sustenance and the demands of faith adds a profound layer of depth to our understanding of this ancient culture, reminding us that for them, every pull of the net was not just an economic act, but a negotiation with the gods themselves. This deep spiritual connection to the fish of the Nile finds one of its most powerful and contradictory expressions in the story of a single, sharp-snouted creature, the oxyhinchus fish. In the city that bore its name, Permejed, this was not merely another animal. It was a divine resident, a living god swimming in the local waters. The origin of this profound veneration is rooted in one of the most dramatic episodes of Egyptian mythology: the murder and dismemberment of the god Osiris by his jealous brother, Set. As the myth goes, after Set killed Osiris and cut his body into 14 pieces, scattering them across Egypt, a crucial part of the god was lost in the Nile, his phallus. It was the oxyhinchus fish that, according to the people of Permejed, subsequently swallowed this sacred relic. In that one act, the fish was forever transformed from a simple aquatic animal into a sacred vessel, a living tomb for a piece of a god, directly tying it to the central Egyptian narrative of death, resurrection, and the promise of eternal life. The fish's divine associations, however, were not straightforward. They were a complex tapestry weaving together both chaos and protection. On one hand, by consuming a part of Osiris, the fish became linked to his murderer, Set, the god of chaos, storms, and the hostile desert. In this light, the oxyhinchus could be viewed as a creature of impurity, a participant in the violent disorder that shattered the cosmic balance, or Mat. Yet, for the citizens of its namesake city, the fish was also intimately connected with the goddess Hathor, the powerful deity of love, music, and celestial nourishment. In her form as the Eye of Ra, Hathor was a fierce protector, and the oxyhinchus was seen as her sacred avatar. This duality meant the fish was a symbol of both the chaotic force that destroyed divine order and the protective, life-affirming power that restored it. This wasn't a contradiction to the ancient Egyptian mind. It was a reflection of the natural world's own complex balance of creation and destruction, a balance they saw played out every year in the Nile's life-giving but destructive flood. This profound religious status created a powerful local taboo that would have governed daily life in Permejed. For anyone living in or visiting this city, harming or eating an oxyhinchus fish was utterly unthinkable. It would have been a direct act of sacrilege, akin to desecrating a temple. The local economy, the daily diet, and the very identity of the people were shaped by this belief. Imagine a fisherman from a neighboring town sailing into the waters near Permejed. He would have to be acutely aware of which species he could legally and safely catch, for pulling the wrong fish from the river could incite religious outrage. This created a fascinating patchwork of dietary laws across Egypt, where a fish that was a forbidden object of worship in one city could be a perfectly acceptable meal just a short journey downriver. The depth of this devotion is physically manifested in the remarkable archaeological finds from the area: the mummified oxyhinchus fish. The Egyptians expressed their piety through tangible offerings, and just as they mummified cats for the goddess Bastet or Ibizes for Thoth, They provided a proper and elaborate afterlife for these sacred fish. Archaeologists have uncovered dedicated cemeteries, or necropolises, near Oxyrhynchus, where these fish were carefully prepared for eternity. The mummification process was meticulous. Each fish was carefully dried, anointed with sacred resins, and then wrapped in fine linen bandages. They were then placed in special containers, which could range from beautifully crafted miniature wooden coffins to intricately decorated pottery jars, often painted with the image of the fish or symbols of the gods it served. Perhaps the most compelling paradox in this entire story is the evidence suggesting that, despite this intense local veneration, the Oxyrhynchus fish was not universally forbidden as food throughout Egypt. In other regions, far from the cult center of Permejde, bones of the Oxyrhynchus have been found in ancient garbage heaps, mixed with the remains of other food fish. This indicates that for Egyptians living outside the fish's sacred zone, it was just another source of protein. This presents a breathtaking cultural reality. An object of deepest reverence in one city was someone else's dinner in another. This wasn't hypocrisy. It was a reflection of Egypt's deeply regional religious practices. A person's relationship with the natural world was defined by their geography and their local gods. The same Nile that flowed past, every city carried different divine messages and different dietary laws depending on the temples that stood on its banks. The cult of the Oxyrhynchus fish serves as a perfect case study, a concentrated lens through which we can view the intricate and often paradoxical relationship the ancient Egyptians had with their environment. It shows us a civilization that did not draw a hard line between the spiritual and the practical. A single species could be a god, a taboo, a mummified votive offering, and in the right context, a meal. This story moves us beyond the grand state religion of pharaohs and pyramids and into the heart of local Egyptian life, where the divine was not a distant concept in a stone temple, but a living, breathing, swimming reality in the water next to your home. It was a world where faith was as fluid and ever-present as the river itself, and where a fisherman's net could, at any moment, haul in either his supper or his god. To truly grasp how deeply fishing was woven into the Egyptian psyche, we must leave the bustling riverbanks and step into the silent, sacred space of the tomb. Here, far from the sun-drenched world of the living, we find the most compelling and beautiful evidence of all. The walls of these eternal homes are not covered with scenes of grand battles or complex religious rituals alone. They are alive with the vibrant, everyday reality of fishing. From the Old Kingdom onward, nobles and officials chose to surround themselves with images of hauling nets, spearing perch, and navigating papyrus skiffs through thickets of reeds. This was not a random decoration. The prolific fishing and fowling in the marshes scene became one of the most enduring motifs in Egyptian funerary art because it carried a profound symbolic weight far beyond a simple depiction of a day's work. At its heart, this scene was a powerful metaphor for the eternal struggle between order and chaos, known to the Egyptians as Mad and Isfet. The papyrus marsh was not just a physical place. It was a liminal zone, the untamed, wild edge of the created world. Its dense, tangled thickets represented the raw, chaotic forces that constantly threaten the stability of the universe. In these scenes, the tomb owner, always depicted on a grand scale, stands majestically in his papyrus skiff. He is shown simultaneously spear in hand, ready to strike a large fish, and using a throw stick to bring down birds from the reeds. This was not a portrait of a man simply putting food on his table. It was a declaration of his power and virtue. By dominating the creatures of the marsh, the fish from the watery chaos below, and the birds from the chaotic air above, he was demonstrating his ability to subdue the forces of disorder itself. This symbolic act ensured that in the afterlife, he would continue to exert this control, guaranteeing a perpetual state of order, abundance, and rebirth in the field of reeds. His successful hunt was a magical guarantee of his own resurrection, mirroring the victory of the gods over the serpent of chaos, Apep. This symbolism comes to life with breathtaking clarity in the artifacts created for the afterlife. One of the most stunning examples is the collection of wooden models discovered in the tomb of the Chancellor Mekheder, who served during the Middle Kingdom. These were not mere sculptures, they were functional magical substitutes, designed to spring to life in the next world and provide for the deceased. Among them is an incredibly detailed model of a papyrus fishing skiff, a masterpiece of miniature artistry. The boat, with its characteristically curved prow, glides through a marsh represented by painted plaster. A boatman poles the skiff from the stern, while another figure stands poised in the bow, a spear in his hand, his gaze fixed on the water below. And there, carved from wood and painted in realistic colors, are the fish themselves, Nile perch and tilapia, swimming around the boat. The scene is frozen in a moment of quiet anticipation, capturing the entire essence of the fishing expedition: the silence, the focus, the intimate connection between man, tool, and river. This model doesn't just show us a boat, it provides a complete, three-dimensional snapshot of the technology, the strategy, and the sheer physical reality of the craft. Beyond these symbolic marsh scenes, tomb walls serve as a veritable encyclopedia of fishing techniques, offering corroborating evidence for the tools and methods we've discussed. In the Mastaba tomb of the 5th Dynasty official Tai at Saqqara, a magnificent relief shows a team of fishermen engaged in a massive seine net operation. The level of detail is extraordinary. We can see the long, buoyant float line, the heavy sinkers pulling the bottom of the net down, and the taut, straining ropes in the hands of the fishermen as they lean back with the effort of the haul. Beneath the water, the net is teeming with a chaotic mass of fish, their scales and species clearly distinguishable. In the tomb of the nobleman Mena at Thebes, we see a different method. Here, a fisherman is depicted in the act of casting a throw net, his body captured in a graceful, dynamic arc, the net spread in a perfect circle above a school of fish. These are not generic or idealized images. They are meticulous records, insisting that the precise methods of catching fish were important enough to be recorded for all eternity. The enduring nature of these scenes across 2,000 years of Egyptian history speaks to a cultural obsession with ensuring that the bounty of the Nile would follow them into the next world. The fish they caught in life were a fundamental source of sustenance. It was only logical that they would require the same sustenance in death. The tomb art and models acted as a permanent, magical insurance policy. Every time a priest or a relative performed a ritual in the tomb, these scenes were believed to be reactivated, providing an endless supply of fish for the Ka, or spirit, of the deceased. This is why the depictions are so specific and so abundant. A nobleman might have a scene of his estate's fishermen delivering thousands of fish to his storerooms, a direct promise of eternal economic security. The message was clear. A prosperous afterlife was one that mirrored the perfect, cyclical abundance of the Nile Valley itself. In the end, the Egyptians sought to take the river with them, and by preserving the image of the fisherman at his work, they ensured its life-giving power would flow forever. But with the river offering such incredible abundance, especially during the seasonal bonanza of the inundation, the ancient Egyptians faced a critical challenge: how to stop this fleeting wealth from literally rotting away. The sheer volume of fish pulled from the Nile in a single day could far exceed what a village could eat fresh. The solution to this problem was not just a matter of convenience, it was a cornerstone of their civilization's stability. They became absolute masters of preservation, transforming a highly perishable resource into a durable, transportable, and storable commodity through the relentless power of the sun, the protective magic of salt, and likely, the subtle alchemy of smoke. The most straightforward and widespread method was sun drying, a technique that harnessed the most abundant resource Egypt had to offer after the Nile itself, the blazing sun. The process was deceptively simple but required skill and timing. Immediately after the catch, the fish would be gutted and cleaned. For larger specimens like the massive Nile perch, they were often split open along the backbone, butterflied, and laid flat to expose the maximum surface area to the air. These prepared fish were then laid out on vast, clean expanses of sun-baked gravel, on raised reed mats, or even on the flat rooftops of mud brick houses. The dry, desert air and intense heat would act like a natural dehydrator, sucking the moisture out of the fish's flesh over a period of days. This desiccation was the key. By removing the water, they were eliminating the environment that bacteria and spoilage microorganisms need to survive. The result was a rock-hard, lightweight fish that could be stored for months, even years, in simple pottery jars or woven baskets. This wasn't a delicacy, it was survival food, a protein-rich staple that could be rehydrated in stews or eaten as a tough, chewy strip. The sound of thousands of these dried fish being packed for transport must have been like the rattling of ancient dice, a promise of food security in a world of uncertainty. For a more refined and longer-lasting product, the Egyptians turned to salting. This process went beyond simple drying, using salt to actively draw out moisture and create a chemical environment where spoilage was virtually impossible. The source of this vital mineral was as strategic as the method itself. While some salt came from evaporating seawater along the Mediterranean coast, the most famous and important source was the Natron Valley, the Wadi el Natron, a desolate depression located northwest of Cairo. This valley was not just a source of salt, it was a sacred industrial zone. Its alkaline lakes yielded a special mixture of salts, primarily sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, which was famously used in the mummification of human bodies. The same properties that drew moisture from a corpse and prevented decay worked perfectly on fish. The process was more involved than sun drying. Layers of cleaned fish would be packed tightly in containers or pits, meticulously covered with layers of natron or other sea salts. The salt would pull the fish's internal moisture out through osmosis, creating a brine that would sometimes be drained and replaced with fresh salt until the fish were fully cured. The result was a product that was not only preserved but also gained a distinct, pungent flavor. This salted fish, known in later classical times as tirichos, was a valuable trade good, its intense saltiness making it a flavor enhancer as much as a source of nutrition. While direct archaeological evidence for smoking is less common than for drying and salting, it is a technique so universal among ancient cultures that it is highly probable the Egyptians used it, especially in the dense, marshy delta region where wood and reeds were more readily available. Smoking combines the dehydrating effect of heat with the antimicrobial properties of chemicals released from smoldering wood. A simple smoking hut could be set up with a fire pit and a rack above it, where split fish would be laid. The slow, cool smoke from a hardwood like acacia or tamarisk, or even from bundles of papyrus reeds, would infuse the fish, coating it in a protective layer of creosote and other compounds that deterred insects and bacteria while imparting a rich, smoky flavor. This method would have been particularly useful for small-scale, local preservation, adding variety to the diet and creating a product that could be consumed with little to no further preparation. The impact of these preservation techniques on Egyptian society cannot be overstated. This was the innovation that transformed fishing from a local subsistence activity into the engine of a state-level economy. Preserved fish became the perfect food for mobility and large-scale organization. The thousands of laborers who built the pyramids at Giza were not fed with fresh fish from the Nile Delta. They were sustained by vast shipments of dried, salted fish that could be transported overland and stored on site in great silos. The Egyptian army, one of the most formidable military machines of the ancient world, marched on its stomach, and that stomach was often filled with this durable, high-protein ration. A soldier on campaign in the arid deserts of Sinai or Nubia could carry a week's worth of food in a single bag without any fear of it spoiling under the hot sun. Furthermore, this preservation technology unlocked the potential for long-distance trade. A pottery jar packed with salted Nile perch or a basket full of dried tilapia became a compact store of wealth that could be shipped across the Mediterranean or transported down the Red Sea. Egyptian preserved fish has been found in archaeological contexts in the Levant and Nubia, a testament to its value as an export commodity. In a world without refrigeration, it was one of the few sources of animal protein that could survive a long, slow journey by donkey caravan or a tumultuous sea voyage. This created a positive feedback loop. The demand from state projects and foreign trade incentivized greater fishing efforts, which in turn required more sophisticated preservation, which then fed back into the growth and stability of the kingdom. The humble, dried fish was, in its own way, as vital to the expansion and endurance of ancient Egypt as the chariot or the hieroglyph, a silent, unassuming pillar of an empire built on the ingenious management of the river's bounty. Yet the story of Egyptian fishing doesn't end at the riverbanks. Their ambition and ingenuity pushed them beyond the familiar brown waters of the Nile and out into the startling blues of the open sea. While the river was their heartland, the Mediterranean coast and the Red Sea presented a new frontier, a vast and challenging larder that required entirely different skills, boats, and courage. Evidence from archaeological sites and temple reliefs reveals that the Egyptians were not just river people. They were capable seafarers who mounted organized expeditions to harvest the rich fisheries of the deep, connecting their civilization to a wider world and bringing exotic marine treasures back to the pharaoh's court. The logistical challenge of reaching these distant waters was immense, especially along the Red Sea coast. To get there, expeditions couldn't simply sail down the Nile. They had to undertake an incredible overland journey. We know from surviving records, like the detailed journal of an official named Henanu from the reign of Mentuhotep III, that these were massive, state-sponsored operations. They would travel from the Nile Valley eastward, across the arid wastes of the eastern desert, following dried riverbeds known as wadis. This was a caravan of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of men sailors, soldiers, cooks, and fishermen, along with donkeys carrying everything they would need. The most remarkable cargo was the boats themselves. They didn't build them on the coast. They built them in the Nile Valley from precious, imported cedar of Lebanon, then disassembled them into carefully numbered planks, and had teams of men carry these heavy timbers for over 100 miles across the desert. Upon reaching the coast, at harbors like Mursa Gawasis, they would then reassemble the ships, a breathtaking feat of organization and labor just to get their fishing fleet into the water. Once these sturdy wooden vessels were launched into the Red Sea, they encountered a marine environment utterly different from the Nile. The water was clear and saline, the currents were powerful and unpredictable, and the fish were entirely new. Reliefs in the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Sahir at Abusir, from the 5th dynasty, provide a stunning visual catalog of this new bounty. The scenes show seagoing ships returning with their holds full of fish that are clearly identifiable as open water species. Among the most prominent is the parrotfish, a vibrant, beak-mouthed reef dweller, and various species of sea bream. But the true prize, the one that speaks to their growing maritime confidence, was tuna. Catching a school of tuna required venturing far from the shore and deploying large, strong nets in deep water. These weren't the passive traps of the river marshes. This was active, pelagic hunting. The presence of tuna in Egyptian art is a powerful testament to their ability to not just sail along the coast, but to engage in true blue water fishing, challenging the open sea for its most powerful and valuable swimmers. The techniques they used in these foreign waters had to adapt to the new environment. While they likely employed large seine nets similar to those used on the Nile, the scale and strength required were on another level. The nets had to be deeper and their cordage stronger to handle the immense power of a school of tuna or the rough conditions of the sea. They also almost certainly used hand lines with large, strong hooks, baited with smaller fish to target specific large predators. The boats themselves were the key to this operation. These were not the flexible papyrus skiffs of the marshes. They were broad, deep-hulled wooden ships, often measuring over 60 feet long, with a single massive square sail and multiple steering oars. This design gave them the stability to handle ocean swells and the cargo capacity to store a large catch, either in salt or in water-filled holds, for the long journey back to the Nile Valley. These vessels were floating bases, allowing the fishermen to stay at sea for extended periods and process their catch on the return voyage. These maritime ventures were about far more than just food. They were a primary thread in the tapestry of international trade and cultural exchange. A fishing expedition in the Red Sea was rarely just a fishing trip. The same ships and sailors that hunted for tuna were also the ones traveling to the fabled land of Punt, a trading partner located likely in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. They would return laden not only with exotic fish but with coveted treasures, fragrant myrrh and frankincense resins, precious ebony wood, live baboons, and leopard skins. This transformed the fisherman into an explorer and a diplomat. Contact with these distant shores brought new ideas, new technologies, and new perspectives back to Egypt. Similarly, in the Mediterranean, fishing voyages along the coast of the Levant brought them into contact with other advanced cultures, like the Canaanites and later the Minoans and Mycenaeans. The exchange of fishing knowledge, perhaps about new net designs, navigation techniques, or preservation methods, would have been a natural byproduct of this interaction, enriching Egyptian maritime culture. This expansion beyond the Nile fundamentally changes our perception of this civilization. It reveals a dynamic and adaptable society, one that looked outward as much as it looked inward. The Egyptians were not isolated by their desert borders. They used the sea as a highway. The fisherman who cast his net into the Red Sea was participating in an economic and cultural network that spanned the ancient world. He was helping to bring exotic goods to the elite, yes, but he was also integrating Egypt into a broader sphere of influence. These maritime forays demonstrate a level of planning, resource allocation, and sheer bravery that rivals the more famous pyramid-building projects. It shows a civilization confident enough to leave its life-giving river behind and test its skills against the vast, unknown expanse of the ocean, proving that their quest for sustenance and wealth was as boundless as the sea itself. So, let's synthesize all we've learned and reconstruct the essential toolkit of an ancient Egyptian fisherman, the collection of gear he relied upon to make his living from the river. This wasn't a random assortment of items. It was a curated, sophisticated array of technology, each piece serving a distinct purpose, born from millennia of observation and innovation. If we could unroll a papyrus satchel from the banks of the Nile, what would we find inside? The most personal tool was the hook and line. Whether it was a painstakingly carved bone hook for smaller catches or a strong, barbed bronze hook forged to battle a massive Nile perch, this was the fisherman's most direct connection to his prey. His line, twisted from tough flax fibers, was coiled carefully, ready to be baited with a worm or a piece of bread. Alongside this, he would carry a selection of netting needles and a bone shuttle for on-the-spot repairs, because a torn net meant a lost catch. His nets themselves were the core of his operation. He might have a small, weighted cast net, perfectly coiled for a single, graceful throw into a shimmering school of fish. For larger efforts, he would have access to the immense seine net, its top edge dotted with wooden or pottery floats and its bottom weighted down with carefully drilled stones, a tool that required the strength and coordination of an entire crew. For passive, around-the-clock fishing, his kit included basket traps, those cleverly woven funnels of reeds that lured fish in but cunningly prevented their escape. And when the situation called for a more direct approach, he had his spears, the single barbed point for a powerful, penetrating strike on a large target, and the multi-pronged leister for a wider, trapping thrust in the shallow, weedy marshes. A sharp flint or copper knife was essential, not for the catch itself, but for the work that followed gutting and cleaning the fish, preparing them for the family pot or for preservation. Finally, we cannot forget the humble yet vital floats and sinkers. Dozens of pierced pottery sherds or lightweight pieces of wood kept his nets riding high in the water, while an equal number of grooved stones acted as anchors, pulling the bottom of the net down to form an inescapable wall. This entire kit was a testament to resourcefulness, a blend of organic materials from the riverbank and sophisticated manufactured metalwork, all designed to work in perfect harmony with the rhythms of the Nile. The evidence for this toolkit is not merely speculative. It's etched in stone and preserved in the earth. The tomb walls at Saqqara and Beni Hassan provide the vivid blueprints, showing us these tools in action, the precise way a cast net is held, the strain on the ropes of a seine net, the poised arm of a spearman. And from the archaeological record, we have the objects themselves. Excavations at workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina have yielded the actual bronze hooks, some still sharp, and the stone net sinkers, worn smooth by the current. We have the clay floats and the bone needles, the very same ones that slipped through the fingers of fishermen thousands of years ago. This synthesis reveals a profound truth. The ancient Egyptian fisherman was no primitive struggler against nature. He was a specialist, an engineer of the aquatic world. His toolkit was not a haphazard collection, but a diverse and purpose-built arsenal, reflecting a deep and intimate understanding of his environment. He knew which tool to use for which fish, in which season, and in which part of the river. From the silent patience of the hook to the communal power of the net, every piece of equipment was a chapter in his ongoing story of survival, a story of how human ingenuity learned to thrive alongside the greatest river on Earth. All of this rich history we've been exploring, these intricate techniques and clever tools, they would be little more than guesswork if not for the remarkable evidence left behind. So how do we actually know the details of how an ancient Egyptian fisherman spent his day? The answer lies in a fascinating form of historical detective work, piecing together clues from two primary sources that beautifully complement each other: the stunning art they created for eternity and the humble, everyday objects they left in the ground. Our most vibrant window into this world comes from the silent, sacred spaces of their tombs. The ancient Egyptians possessed a powerful belief that images and models placed in a tomb could be magically activated to provide for the deceased in the afterlife. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a functional, spiritual necessity. Because of this, nobles and officials had their earthly lives meticulously illustrated on the chapel walls of their eternal homes. For us, these scenes are like a frozen documentary. In the tomb of Tai at Saqqara, we don't just hear about a seine net. We see it in action, the long line of fishermen straining against the ropes, the net bulging with a chaotic mass of fish beneath the waterline, their scales and species rendered with astonishing clarity. In the tomb of Mena at Thebes, we witness the precise, athletic motion of a cast net being thrown, the fisherman's body captured in a perfect arc. These images provide undeniable proof of the tools and the teamwork involved, giving us a frame-by-frame reconstruction of activities that vanished millennia ago. They are our primary guide to the how, but art, for all its vividness, has its limitations. The tomb paintings were idealized to a degree, showing an orderly, prosperous world for the tomb owner. They show us the techniques, but they can't tell us everything about the materials. The nets in the paintings look strong and perfect, but what were they really made of? The hooks look effective, but what metal were they forged from? This is where archaeology steps in, providing the tangible, physical evidence that grounds the art in reality. Excavations at workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina, the home of the artisans who built the royal tombs, have yielded the actual, physical tools of the trade. We've recovered bronze fish hooks, some still sharp, their barbs designed to hold a struggling catfish. We found the grooved stones used as net sinkers, worn smooth by the river's current, and the pierced pottery sherds that acted as floats. These artifacts are the unvarnished truth, the objects that were held, used, lost, and discarded by the fishermen themselves. They confirm the technological details and show the wear and tear of daily life that the perfect tomb scenes never could. The challenge, however, is that the archaeological record is inherently incomplete, biased towards what can survive the ravages of time. This is the great puzzle of studying ancient fishing. The most common materials, wood, papyrus reeds, and linen netting, are all organic and perishable. In Egypt's dry climate, these items can only survive under exceptional conditions, such as in a completely sealed tomb or an extremely arid desert site. This means we have countless illustrations of papyrus skiffs, but only a handful of actual fragments of these boats have ever been found. We see vast nets in tomb art, but the linen fibers themselves have almost always rotted away, leaving behind only the stone weights and pottery floats that once anchored them. This evidentiary gap forces historians and archaeologists to become forensic reconstructors. We have the picture on the box of the tomb painting, and a few of the key pieces, the metal hooks and stone weights. We then have to logically deduce what the missing pieces, the wooden boat frames and the linen nets, must have been like, using the art as our blueprint and the surviving artifacts as our proof of materials. This is where a third category of evidence becomes invaluable: the tomb models. These were not just sculptures, they were magical substitutes intended to perform eternal labor for the deceased. The most famous collection, from the tomb of the Chancellor Mekheder, includes an exquisitely detailed model of a papyrus fishing skiff. This model is a crucial bridge between the two-dimensional art and the three-dimensional world. It shows us the texture of the bundled reeds, the way the boat was lashed together, and the posture of the fishermen in a way a flat wall painting cannot. It confirms the practicality of the designs we see in art, providing a scaled-down yet physically real representation of the technology. Together, this trio of sources, the idealized art, the gritty artifacts, and the clarifying models, allows us to cross-check our understanding. When the art shows a certain type of hook, and we find that exact type of hook in an excavation, the connection becomes undeniable. It's a collaborative effort across millennia, where the Egyptians' desire for eternal provision provides us with the evidence to reconstruct their daily, earthly struggles and triumphs on the life-giving Nile. The first light of dawn would have crept across the sky, painting the Nile in soft hues of gold and pink. But for a fisherman named Kensu, the day began long before the sun's warmth touched his skin. His small mud-brick home, nestled in a village not far from the riverbank, would have stirred to life in the cool, pre-dawn darkness. After a simple meal of bread and beer, his first task was not to grab his net, but to carefully consider the river itself. He'd step outside, feeling the air, looking to the sky, and recalling the stories of his father and grandfather. Was it the season of the inundation, when the floodwaters had receded, trapping fish in vast, shallow lagoons? If so, his wicker basket traps and his multi-pronged Leicester spear would be his tools of choice. Or was it the dry season, when the Nile receded to its main channel, and the massive Nile perch moved into the deeper, cooler waters? In that case, his strong, barbed bronze hooks and his sturdy flax line would be essential. This daily decision was the first act of his profession, a blend of inherited wisdom and personal observation that dictated the entire day's strategy. With his plan formed, he would gather his selected gear. He might check the knots on his cast net, ensuring the weights were secure. He'd run his fingers along the sharpened point of his fish spear, perhaps touching up the edge with a piece of sandstone. Every item had its place in his papyrus skiff, a vessel he had helped his father build, its bundled reeds now seasoned and supple from countless days on the water. Pushing the lightweight boat from the reedy bank into the cool water, he would step in, feeling the familiar, flexible give of the papyrus beneath his feet. Using a long pole, he'd silently push away from the shore, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the reeds and the distant calls of waking birds. This tranquil journey out onto the river was a time of focus, a quiet transition from the land world to the water world, where different rules and different dangers applied. His first efforts of the day might be to check the basket traps he had set the previous evening. Poling his skiff into a quiet backwater, he would gently pull on the cord attached to one of the submerged, funnel-shaped traps. A slight resistance and a telltale wobble would bring a smile to his face. Hauling it up, he'd untie the end and shake out a squirming mass of tilapia and a small catfish. He'd rebait the trap with a piece of old bread or a fish head and lower it back into its prime location. This was the reliable, low-effort yield that would form the base of his family's meal. But for a larger catch, for something to trade or pay as tribute to the local temple estate, he needed to be more active. If he saw a shimmering disturbance on the surface, a school of baitfish, he would ready his cast net. Coiling it expertly in his hands, he would stand, find his balance in the wobbling skiff, and in one fluid, powerful motion, spin and launch the net. It would fly out in a perfect circle, the weighted edges sinking down to encapsulate the school beneath. A quick pull on the central retrieval line would close the bottom like a purse, and he would haul in a wriggling, silver harvest. As the sun climbed higher, beating down with an intensity that reflected off the water, the challenges of his profession became starkly apparent. The river was not a benign provider, it was a shared space, home to creatures that saw his small skiff as either an obstacle or a curiosity. The greatest physical threat was the hippopotamus. A pod of these colossal animals resting in a mid-river shallows was a sight that would freeze the blood of any fisherman. They were notoriously territorial and capricious, and a bull hippo could easily snap a papyrus boat in two with a single bite of its powerful jaws. Kensu would give them a wide berth, poling silently and quickly away, his heart pounding. Then there were the crocodiles. More stealthy than the hippos, they would often be little more than a pair of nostrils and unblinking eyes breaking the surface of the water. They were a constant lurking presence, a danger not just to the fisherman but to his catch. It was not unheard of for a crocodile to be attracted by the splashing of fish in a net and charge, tearing the precious linen and stealing the day's work in an instant. A wise fisherman always kept a watchful eye on the water and had a long pole ready not just for propulsion, but for defense. The midday heat could be punishing, and this was often a time for quieter, more patient techniques. Finding a shady spot near a stand of papyrus, Kensu might bait his bronze hook and drop his line into the water, letting the skiff drift slowly with the current. This was a moment of rest, but also of intense concentration, feeling for the subtle tug on the flax line that signaled a fish investigating his bait. For a larger prize, he might employ a different strategy altogether. Spotting the dark, slow-moving shadow of a large Nile perch in the clearer water, he would become a hunter. Readying his single-pointed spear, he would stand motionless in the prow, his body coiled like a spring. He'd have to account for the way the water bent the light, aiming not at the fish he saw, but slightly below it. With a sudden, powerful lunge, he would drive the spear down, hoping the barbed point would strike true and hold fast against the tremendous, thrashing power of the river giant. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent, his thoughts would turn toward home. The final task was to sort his catch. The smaller fish, the tilapia and the catfish, would be kept fresh, perhaps to be grilled over a fire that evening. But the larger fish, especially the prized Nile perch, required immediate processing to prevent spoilage. Back on the shore, surrounded by other returning fishermen and the chatter of family members, he would clean his catch with a sharp flint knife. The best of the large fish would be split open along the backbone and laid out on the hot, dry sand or on a raised reed platform. There, under the relentless sun, they would begin the process of drying, transforming into a durable, storable commodity. This was the final, crucial step that turned his daily labor into long-term security. As the sky turned to a deep orange and then to violet, the smell of wood smoke and grilling fish filling the air, Kensu could finally rest. His body would be tired, his skin salty and sun-warmed, but there was a profound satisfaction in the yield of baskets and the rows of fish laid out for the future. He had navigated the river's gifts and its dangers, using skills honed over a lifetime, and in doing so, he had not only fed his family but had played his small, essential part in the enduring rhythm of the civilization that thrived on the banks of the Nile. As we reel in our exploration of the Nile's ancient bounty, it becomes overwhelmingly clear that Egyptian fishing was a masterpiece of human adaptation, a complex and vital practice sustained by profound ingenuity. This was not the haphazard work of a primitive society merely scraping by. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered industry that formed a cornerstone of one of history's most enduring civilizations. From the solitary fisherman patiently working his line to the massive, coordinated crews hauling seines, and from the clever, passive traps working through the night to the daring spearmen challenging river giants, every technique was a refined response to the rhythms of the river. They were not just taking from the Nile, they were engaging in a deep, intelligent partnership with it, applying a blend of practical engineering, biological understanding, and spiritual reverence that allowed them to thrive for millennia. The legacy of this intimate relationship is etched not only in stone and artifact, but in the very foundations of empire. We must shift our perspective and understand that the pyramids and temples we so admire were not built by bread and beer alone. They were raised on the protein-rich fuel provided by the countless dried and salted fish that fed the army of laborers. The economic might that allowed pharaohs to project their power across the ancient world was, in part, drawn from the bustling trade in preserved Nile perch and the taxes paid in fish by professional guilds. The fisherman in his papyrus skiff was as crucial to the state's machinery as the scribe with his papyrus scroll. By mastering preservation, they transformed a perishable resource into a storable, transportable form of wealth, creating an economic engine that powered monumental construction, military campaigns, and long-distance trade networks. Their daily catch, when multiplied by thousands of fishermen and processed on an industrial scale, became one of the hidden pillars supporting the grandeur of pharaonic Egypt. What is perhaps most resonant for us today is the sheer sustainability and intelligence embedded in their methods. They developed an entire toolkit of techniques, each suited to a specific environment, season, and species, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of ecology that feels remarkably modern. They used fine mesh nets for small baitfish and large, open weaves for massive perch, allowing smaller fish to escape and ensuring future stocks. They created traps that harvested fish without constant effort and used torchlight to exploit natural behaviors, maximizing yield while minimizing waste. This was not an extractive relationship. It was a managed, cyclical harvest that worked in concert with the annual inundation. Their approach stands as a powerful testament to a civilization that looked at its primary resource not as something to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood, respected, and nurtured for generation after generation. As our journey through this lost world concludes, the next time you see the Nile in a documentary or picture its winding path through the desert, I encourage you to look beyond the pyramids and the golden masks. Look instead at the water itself, and remember the unseen generations of fishermen whose skill, courage, and quiet knowledge pulsed like a steady heartbeat beneath the more famous narratives of kings and gods. They were the true sustainers, the ones who harnessed the river's pulse to fuel an empire. Their story is a humbling reminder that history's greatest wonders are often built upon the foundation of everyday brilliance. We are left to wonder, which of these ancient techniques surprised you the most? Was it the sheer cleverness of the funnel-shaped basket trap, the coordinated power of the massive seine net, or the daring precision of the nighttime spearfisherman? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear which aspect of this ancient craft captured your imagination. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the past, be sure to subscribe and join us for our next journey into the hidden